Believe it or not, the moment my life collapsed is burned into me so vividly that I still wake up at night hearing it again. I can hear her voice, my wife's voice, bright, excited, nothing like the tired woman I thought I knew. She was in our kitchen, stirring her coffee, speaking on the phone. She wasn't talking about bills or errands. She was talking about me. She said she wanted me gone. She said Trevor, our family's close friend, made her feel alive, treated her like a queen, while I was nothing more than a dull architect with an old Subaru. That day, I stopped breathing like a husband and started watching like a stranger. I remember the exact second my life shattered. On that Tuesday, I came home 3 hours earlier than usual. The client had cancelled a meeting on a new residential project at the last minute. My hands still smelled of drafting ink and office coffee when I quietly opened the front door of our house on Capitol Hill. From the kitchen came Rebecca's voice, sharp, unusually lively. Out of habit, I hit record on my phone without even thinking. At first, I thought she was complaining to a friend about bills or work, but within a few phrases it became clear she was talking about me. She said she couldn't stand me any longer and wanted me simply gone from her life for Trevor's sake. The air caught in my throat, my palms grew wet. After all the years of marriage, I suddenly became no one. My name is Daniel Adams, and I am an architect. My studio is in a converted loft in Belton space that smells of coffee and fresh paint. Every morning I woke before sunrise, brewed strong espresso, and sat at my drafting table. I married Rebecca many years ago. Back then, I believed she was the love of my life. She admired my projects, said the smell of fresh blueprints in my studio reminded her of safety and home. Together, we built a house in a prestigious neighborhood and filled it with furniture I had chosen with special care. I was not wealthy, but I considered myself rich in all the ways that mattered. At least, that is what I thought until that day. Rebecca once told me she admired how I poured myself into every detail. She didn't mind that I drove an old Subaru or that our vacations were spent camping by Cascade Lakes. At least, I believed she didn't mind. My dream was simple: to grow old with her, maybe adopt a child, fill our home with laughter. I thought devotion and hard work would be enough. But devotion can go unnoticed when someone's attention is already elsewhere. Rebecca was beautiful, energetic, the kind of woman who lit up a room with her smile. I adored her and tried to show it, bringing her coffee in bed, fixing squeaky hinges before she noticed, leaving notes in her purse. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The way she looked at me became different. The conversations that once lasted late into the night turned into short, polite exchanges. I told myself it was stress or fatigue, but I felt an invisible wall slowly rising between us. She began spending more evenings away, claiming modern dance helped her stay balanced. I stayed home, working on new projects, convincing myself her distance was temporary. I didn't realize then that she was already slipping away. One of the heaviest battles in our marriage was infertility. Year after year we tried doctor visits, endless tests, treatments that drained our savings and our spirits. Each month brought the same crushing disappointment. I still remember holding her while she cried on the bathroom floor, whispering that it was her fault. I never blamed her. I reminded her that love wasn't measured by children, that she was enough for me, she would always be enough. At night I researched specialists, gathered information on adoption agencies, promised her we would build a family somehow. Those years left deep scars in our marriage. Where I tried to fill the cracks with patience and faith, she filled them with shame and silence. I thought my devotion was unshakable, but I didn't see how bitterness was already poisoning her heart against me. That Tuesday began like any other. I was at a meeting with potential clients presenting a design for a modern private home. But when I arrived, I learned they had chosen another firm. Disappointed but resigned, I packed up my drawings and drove home earlier than usual. I remember pulling into the driveway, noticing her car in the garage. A small spark of joy flared in me. Maybe we could have lunch together, a rare surprise in our busy lives. I entered quietly, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air. I expected to hear the faint hum of her jazz playlist from the kitchen. Instead, I froze in the hallway. Rebecca's voice cut through the silence, sharp, animated, so unlike what I had heard for months. Standing by the half-open door, I heard the clink of a spoon against ceramic. She was stirring something as she talked. The refrigerator hummed softly. Somewhere a faucet dripped. And among these ordinary household sounds, her words drove so deep under my ribs that I stopped breathing for a moment. She told her friend she no longer saw a man in me, only an obstacle. That Trevor made her feel alive, treated her like a queen. That I was just a boring architect with an old Subaru. Each phrase added weight where only that morning there had been calm. Trevor's name burned most of all. My stomach clenched as if struck. He was our mutual acquaintance, a corporate lawyer who had helped with real estate documents, long moving in our circle as a trusted advisor. I had once invited him to neighborhood barbecues, introduced him to Rebecca. All that time, he was simply waiting. Rebecca's voice turned dreamy. She told her friend she wanted to get rid of me without a messy divorce, without dividing property. She just wanted me gone, leaving her free for a new life. My fingers turned slick with sweat as I gripped my phone tighter. Every word was recorded, every thought of betrayal becoming evidence. I didn't know it then, but that recording would become the only weapon I had. When the call finally ended, I stood in the hallway. The familiar sounds of the house no longer felt like mine, the ticking clock, the creaking floorboards. Silence pressed against my chest, broken only by the pounding of my heart. I felt hollow inside. My body wanted to collapse, to scream, to smash something. But my mind became cold and clear. The pain seemed to retreat inward, leaving only cold thoughts. The scariest part was how clearly I saw everything, stripped of emotion. I shoved the phone into my pocket, turned, and walked to the front door. I opened it loudly and rattled the keys as if I had just returned from work. I called to her the way I always did and stepped into the kitchen. Rebecca was there, her phone put away, smiling as if nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek as though her words hadn't emptied me. I smelled her perfume, the same scent that once brought joy, now making me nauseous. Her hands busied themselves with a mug. I feigned care, asking how her day had been, though inside I was breaking apart. Inside, every cell in my body screamed in pain. I didn't confront her, not that night, not the next day. Instead, I began to observe. To listen. To memorize her habits, her lies, her little escapes disguised as dance classes. Every laugh, every secret message, every absence became another piece of the larger picture. She thought I was blind. She had no idea I was planning her reckoning. That night I didn't say a word. I simply lay beside her, listening to the house breathe in the dark. The decision came quietly. If she wanted my silence, she would have it. I would disappear so completely that she would understand her dream would become her punishment. What would you have done in my place? Would you forgive someone who dreams of your disappearance, or start planning your own escape? The next morning, I woke up a different man. Rebecca was still asleep beside me, her breathing steady and calm, while I lay staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange clarity in my head. Yesterday's pain had not disappeared, but now it had become fuel for something greater. I got up quietly, brewed coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the notebook I usually use for architectural sketches. But today I wasn't drawing houses, I was drafting the blueprint of my escape. The Capitol Hill house had been our nest, but legally it was mine alone. I had bought it 3 years before the wedding, pouring in every dollar of my savings as a young architect. When 5 years ago we needed to reduce our monthly payments, Rebecca had signed the refinancing papers without even reading them. Back then it seemed like just paperwork. Now it was my salvation. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I knew by heart. Jason Adams, my younger brother, had been working in investments and real estate for 20 years. We had been close since childhood, and if anyone could help me close a deal quickly and quietly, it was him. The call was brief. I said I needed to sell the house as soon as possible, preferably for cash and without attracting attention. Jason didn't ask questions, he knew me too well. He simply said he had a client from California looking for property in Seattle to invest in. By the end of the conversation, the deal was practically set. An hour later, Rebecca came downstairs, dressed for her morning run, humming softly while checking messages on her phone. I watched her over the edge of the newspaper, studying the woman I thought I knew but clearly did not. She told me she had a long day ahead, first dance class, then meeting a friend, then an extra session in the evening. I nodded, feigned understanding, and silently thought that Trevor probably knew her schedule better than I did. When the door closed behind her, I felt relief. Finally, I could act openly. I spent the next few hours not at my drafting table, but in my studio systematically photographing everything I had built with my hands over the years of our marriage. Every piece of furniture, every shelf, every detail that bore my imprint. By law, it was my intellectual property. Rebecca could claim half the value of the house, but the furniture I had designed and built belonged to me alone. I carefully compiled a catalogue with photos, dates, and approximate values. The bed we slept in, my work. The dining table where she drank her morning coffee, also mine. The bookshelves filled with her novels, the result of months of my labor. Each photo became another proof that she would get less than she expected. By noon I headed downtown to the office of Scott Bennett, a divorce lawyer with an impeccable reputation. His office on the 27th floor of Columbia Center smelled of leather and success. Scott listened to my story, taking notes. When I played him the recording of Rebecca's call, his face turned to stone. Washington state law allows one-party consent recordings. That meant my recording was fully legal and admissible in court. Scott explained that with such evidence, divorce proceedings would almost certainly end in my favor. We agreed to file in a week, once I had gathered additional proof. Rebecca came home around 10 that evening, flushed and slightly disheveled. She explained that the class had been especially intense, and afterward she had dinner with friends. I listened, nodded in the right places, and thought about how well she lied. In her hair I caught the faint trace of a man's cologne, not mine. The next days passed in a strange double life. By day I was the loving husband making her breakfast, asking about her plans, kissing her goodbye. Once she left, I turned into an investigator, methodically gathering evidence of her betrayal. I reviewed our bank statements for the past 6 months and found expenses I had never seen before: lavish dinners at restaurants we had never visited together, purchases from boutiques she had never entered with me, hotel bills paid with her credit card on days she claimed to be at dance class. Each discovery cut deeper, but I forced myself to record everything in a special folder. I held it so tightly my fingers went numb. Pain could wait, evidence mattered more. Evenings were the hardest. Rebecca had grown unusually affectionate. Apparently Trevor awakened in her some twisted tenderness toward me. She cuddled on the couch while we watched television, spoke about her plans, even suggested a vacation. I smiled, agreed, played along with plans that would never happen. Inside, every touch made me sick. A week later Jason called with good news. The buyer was ready to pay $750,000 in cash. The sum was less than the house was worth, but for me it was salvation. I wanted out as soon as possible. The deal could close within 10 days. I accepted without hesitation. That same day I opened a new bank account in my name and began transferring money from our joint savings. I moved $2,000 or $3,000 at a time every few days to make it look natural. Over a month I planned to move about $50,000, enough to start a new life. Rebecca noticed nothing. She was too absorbed in her affair to track our finances. Each night as I lay beside her, I silently counted the days until my freedom. She breathed evenly, sometimes murmured in her sleep, while I planned to vanish, so suddenly she wouldn't know what had happened. With each passing day, it became easier to pretend. I poured her tea, nodded at the right moments, said the right words, but inside I was already gone. She took my detachment as reconciliation. She didn't realize that I had already begun disappearing from her life. Would you be able to hide your true intentions for months from the one who betrayed you, or would pain and anger consume you first? On Thursday morning I signed the documents that changed my life forever. Sitting in a notary's office on Pike Street, my hands trembled as I placed signature after signature on the papers that officially transferred our house to a new owner. The pen felt cold in my fingers, the ink spread smoothly across the page, and all I could think was that Rebecca had no idea what was happening. By 10:47 that morning, the house was no longer ours. Within a minute, $750,000 appeared in my account. In 60 seconds, I became a free man with enough money to start over anywhere I chose. Of course, the deal had been prepared in advance. Jason had spent days gathering the paperwork, and the buyer was ready with cash. That morning was only the final act: signatures, seals, and a transfer that took minutes but had been set in motion long before. The notary shook my hand and congratulated me on a successful deal. I smiled, thanked him, and tucked my copies of the documents into a folder. It was all so formal, so proper. No one asked why I was selling the family near so quickly and quietly. Stepping outside, I felt a strange dizziness. Not from joy, but from the realization that there was no way back. Rebecca was spending her morning in the dance studio, likely sharing dreams of the future with Trevor, while the house she thought would hold the future already belonged to a stranger from California. The next 2 days passed in a state of cold focus. Rebecca noticed nothing. She was too absorbed in her secret meetings and fantasies of freedom. I, on the other hand, methodically collected the last pieces of the puzzle for my escape. I photographed everything I had created over the years, from the bed to the shelves. I compiled a detailed inventory of all the things Rebecca would not be able to take with her because they were my work, my creation. The dining table where she drank her morning coffee, the bookshelves filled with her favorite novels, each one was mine, and each one would remain with the new owner. On Saturday evening, while Rebecca left for another so-called dance class, I packed my life into 12 cardboard boxes. Clothes, photographs, my grandfather's tools, a few books, documents. Nothing else mattered. 17 years of marriage fit into the trunk of my old Subaru. The hardest part was writing the letter. I sat at the oak kitchen table I had built 5 years earlier, searching for words. The pen scratched against the paper as I forced myself to keep the message short. I wanted to pour out all the pain, the disappointment, the rage. Instead, I kept it simple. I told her the truth, that I had overheard her call, that I knew about Trevor, that I had recordings of her admissions. I reminded her that she wanted me gone and now her wish had come true. I explained that the house was sold, that the divorce papers had been filed through Scott Bennett, and that I wasn't going to fight her. I was simply disappearing from her life forever. I enclosed a flash drive with the recording of her call and copies of the sale documents. Everything clean, everything legal, everything final. I sealed the envelope and left it on the kitchen island, right where she always dropped her car keys. On Sunday morning, while Rebecca was still asleep, I loaded the boxes into my car. The house was silent, the morning light pouring through the windows I had once installed myself. I walked through the rooms one last time, not with nostalgia, but with a sense of closure. That part of my life was finished. At 7 o'clock, I started the engine and pulled away from the driveway. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller until it disappeared around the bend. I didn't look back. Ahead of me lay the road to Portland, Oregon, where a new life awaited. On the way, I thought about what must be happening back at home. Rebecca probably woke up, went to the kitchen for coffee, and found the envelope. For a moment, she might have thought it was one of my old romantic notes I had left at the Sun-Times. But as soon as she read the first lines, her world began to collapse at the same speed mine had on that Tuesday. By the time she realized what had happened, I was already 200 miles from Seattle. By the time she tried to act, it was too late. The house was sold, the money transferred, the divorce filed. I had vanished from her life just as suddenly as she had vanished from mine when she wished me dead for another man. Halfway to Portland, I stopped at a gas station and bought coffee. Sitting at a plastic table, I felt something like peace for the first time in weeks. Not joy, not relief, just the absence of the constant weight I had carried in my chest since overhearing that call. I thought of Rebecca likely screaming into the phone to Trevor. I wondered if he would support her or find a way to distance himself from the fallout. Trevor would surely disappear when romantic games turned into real consequences. Portland greeted me with rain and grey skies, the perfect weather for a new beginning. I rented a small apartment in the Pearl District, a temporary place until I decided what to do next. The apartment was bare, impersonal, but there was nothing in it to remind me of the past. That first night in the new city, I lay on a folding cot and listened to the sounds of an unfamiliar street. Cars, rain against the windows, voices of passers-by, it was all foreign, but it was honest. No one here lied to me. No one plotted behind my back. Here I could start over and become who I wanted to be, not who others saw me as. The next day Scott called from Seattle. Rebecca tried to contest the sale of the house, claiming she signed the documents under pressure. I smirked as Scott relayed her protests. All the paperwork was airtight, with witnesses and notarizations. Her attempts looked like the desperate moves of someone who had suddenly been left with nothing. Scott added that Rebecca had hired a lawyer and intended to fight for half the sale price. I laughed for the first time in a long while. She could fight all she wanted, the law was on my side, and the audio recording of her confession made any claims meaningless. That evening, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Not because all my problems were solved, they were only beginning, but because I no longer lived a double life. I wasn't pretending, hiding, or secretly planning anymore. I was simply myself in a new place where the past could not reach me. Would you be able to change your life so radically in a single week, or would fear of the unknown be stronger than your desire to break free from lies? Rebecca found my letter on Monday morning, when I was already crossing the Oregon border. Around noon, Scott called me, and I could hear the relief in his voice. She had stormed into his office, eyes red from tears, makeup smeared, demanding to stop the divorce immediately. When Scott explained that the documents had already been filed and that the audio recording made her position hopeless, Rebecca had a meltdown right there in the reception area. She screamed that it was illegal, accused me of stealing her house, threatened to call the police. Scott's secretary had to summon security. Rebecca tried to reach me more than 40 times during the first 2 days. Calls, emails, desperate messages. I read a few of the first ones where she called me a bastard, a psychopath, begged me to come back and talk. Then I blocked her number. It was more interesting to watch her support collapse. On Wednesday, she called her sister Margaret in Tacoma, explained everything, and asked to stay with her for a while. Margaret listened and told her she couldn't take in a woman who had destroyed her marriage with betrayal. I learned this from Jason, who ran into Margaret at the mall. She told him about the call and admitted she had always suspected something was wrong. The family Rebecca counted on turned its back on her in her hardest moment. Her dance studio friends weren't eager to help either. The same friend Rebecca has complained to about me on the phone suddenly became very busy. The other women in the group learned of the scandal and began to distance themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a divorcing woman who had lost her home because of her own affair. The most painful part for Rebecca was Trevor's behavior. When the scandal broke and she rushed to him for support, the corporate lawyer suddenly became unavailable. His secretary said he was on a business trip in negotiations on vacation. Trevor vanished from her life as abruptly as he had entered it. Jason told me he saw Trevor that same week in a Belltown restaurant with another woman. Young, blonde, very much like Rebecca had been 5 years ago. Some men never change, they just find new victims when the old ones become problems. By the end of the week, Rebecca was renting a room in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Seattle. No income, no family support, no lover who had promised her a new life. The woman who dreamed of freedom just a week earlier discovered that freedom could be very lonely. She hired a lawyer, not a very good one, judging by how he handled the case. They tried to challenge the sale of the house, claiming I had hidden my intentions from her. But all the documents were correct. The house had been mine even before the marriage, and the recording of her own words made any claim ridiculous. The court dismissed the case in a single day. The judge listened to Rebecca's lawyer, heard the recording, and rejected every demand. He even ordered her to pay court costs, saying the claim had no basis. Rebecca left the courtroom more broken than ever. I followed everything remotely through Scott, who represented me. He told me she sat hunched, as if all her confidence had drained away, wearing a cheap suit from a clearance rack. Her voice shook so badly her words drowned in the silence of the room. The woman who had once radiated confidence had turned into a shadow of herself. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after I left. Rebecca received nothing, no house, no alimony, not even the furniture I had built with my own hands. The recording of her infidelity stripped her of every right under Washington law. I received the final notice by email while sitting in a Portland cafe. Rain tapped on the windows, people hurried past with umbrellas, and I drank my coffee realizing I was finally free. The past no longer held me by the throat. That evening I opened a bottle of good wine not to celebrate, but to mark the end of 17 long years. A marriage that had lasted nearly 2 decades ended quietly, in solitude, under the sound of rain in an unfamiliar city. It was neither joyful nor sad, just final. The last news I heard of Rebecca came a month later from Jason. She had taken a cashier job in a small store, rented a tiny studio in a rough Seattle neighborhood. A middle-aged woman starting over without education, without connections, without money. Her dream of a beautiful life with Trevor had turned into a daily struggle for the simplest things. Sometimes in the evenings, walking the rainy streets of Portland, I thought about how things might have turned out differently. If she hadn't cheated, if she had valued what we had, if she hadn't wished me gone. But those thoughts came rarely and left quickly. The past remained in Seattle, and the future stretched ahead in this honest, rainy city. And what do you think? Did Rebecca deserve such a downfall, or was I too harsh in punishing someone who simply fell out of love and made the wrong choice? I met Laura in the most unexpected place, a Home Depot in downtown Portland. She stood in front of a shelf with wood stains, samples in her hands, frowning as she tried to choose the right shade. Rain drummed on the roof, and the store's bright lights made the colors look deceptive. I walked over and offered help. Laura explained that she was restoring an antique desk for a local art gallery where she worked as a curator. Her fingers were stained with paint, her hair loosely tied in a bun, and in her eyes I saw the same passion for work that I had always felt in myself. Over coffee in a nearby diner we talked for 3 hours. Laura spoke about restoration projects, and I spoke about houses I had designed in Seattle. Neither of us mentioned past relationships, but I sensed she carried scars too. In her laughter I heard the caution of someone who had learned not to trust too quickly. Our meetings began as weekly consultations about old furniture. Laura invited me to look at pieces the gallery was preparing for exhibitions. I identified types of wood, explained construction features, showed her how to repair joints while preserving the original look. Gradually those consultations turned into walks around Portland. We explored Saturday farmers markets, browsed through Powell's bookstores, sat in small local cafes, and watched the city wake up under the morning rain. Laura knew every hidden corner, every story of the old buildings. With her, I didn't feel the need to be someone else. I didn't have to pretend, prove my worth, or walk on eggshells. Laura valued my silence as much as my words. She understood that sometimes the best conversation is the quiet of two people together, listening to the rain. 3 months later, I told her about Rebecca. We were sitting on a bench in Tom McCall Park, watching fog rise from the Willamette River. Laura listened to my entire story without interrupting or judging. When I finished, she simply took my hand and said that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. Laura, too, was divorced. Her first husband loved the idea of a creative wife more than the woman herself. He wanted her to be his muse, not his partner. When Laura began to succeed in her field, he couldn't bear it. Their divorce was quiet, without drama, but it left her knowing that love without respect is not love at all. I asked her to move in 6 months after we met. Not out of passion or desperation, but from a calm certainty that we were right for each other. Laura didn't agree immediately. She was cautious, as was I, but when she finally brought her boxes into my apartment, it felt like the most natural decision in the world. Our life became simple and honest. In the mornings, Laura went to the gallery. I worked on new landscape design projects, a direction I had discovered in Portland. In the evenings, we cooked dinner together, read books in the same room, plan weekend trips to the ocean or the Cascade Mountains. I'd opened a small landscape design studio in the Alberta district. Clients came not for flashy glamour, but for functional beauty, gardens that harmonized with homes in Oregon's climate. The work gave me a satisfaction I had never felt in Seattle. Here I created not to hold on to someone, but because it was my calling. Laura and I married almost 2 years after we met. A small ceremony in Portland's Japanese garden, only our closest friends. No grand promises of forever, just the honest desire to walk through life side by side, supporting each other. On the wedding day, standing beneath blooming cherry blossoms, I realized love and dependence are not the same. With Rebecca, I had been afraid of losing what I thought was mine. With Laura, I rejoiced that we chose each other and knew every single day. Laura's hand trembled in mine, but it was a tremor of joy. My breath caught in my chest. This wasn't possession, it was partnership. Sometimes in the evenings I think about Rebecca. I wonder if she found peace in her new life or still blames me for all her problems. Jason occasionally sends news she still works as a cashier, lives alone, looks older than her years. Part of me regrets how it ended, but most of me is simply grateful for the lesson. Rebecca's betrayal taught me to see the difference between love and dependence. I used to think love meant clinging to a person at any cost, forgiving everything, sacrificing myself for the sake of the relationship. Now I know true love is when two whole people choose to walk together without losing themselves. Laura never tried to fill the emptiness Rebecca left. Instead, she helped me see there was never an emptiness at all, only a false need for approval. With her, I don't seek proof of my worth. I simply love, create, and love without fear of losing. Today, 5 years later, I sit in my Portland garden and listen to Laura humming in the kitchen as she makes Sunday breakfast. Rain softly taps the leaves of the Japanese maple we planted in our first year together. The air smells of coffee, blooming jasmine, and that special freshness that comes only after rain. I don't regret what happened with Rebecca. Without her betrayal, I would never have ended up here, in this quiet, honest life. Sometimes only pain reveals what you cannot see otherwise. Revenge was only the beginning. My true victory was learning to love again, this time for real. And what would you choose to stay in a relationship that destroys you out of fear of loneliness, or to risk starting over for the chance of finding real happiness?